Thank you and good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Economic Forum Technical Advisory Committee on Future State Revenues. May I have the secretary call roll, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Russell Ginden, Principal Deputy Fiscal Analyst with the Fiscal Analysis Division of the Legislative Council Bureau of Staff to the Technical Advisory Committee. And you may hear me refer to the group as TAC because that's just a lot easier to say. So with that, I'll proceed with calling roll. Andrew Klinger.
Here.
Jeff Hardcastle. David Schmidt.
Here.
Wayne Thorley.
Here.
Mary Walker.
Here.
Vice Chair Sarah Kaufman.
Here.
Chair Susan Brown.
Here.
Madam Chair, we'll let the record show that we have everybody present, but Member Jeff Hardcastle, thus we have a quorum present and can proceed with the meeting.
Okay, at this time, I'll open it up to public comment. I would ask BPS staff if we have any public comment at this time.
Madam Chair, the line is open and working. However, the public comment lobby is empty at this time.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to item 3, review and approval of revenue forecasts for selected general fund sources. Mr. Ginden, before you present that, since we last met on November 2nd, an economic forum meeting took place on November 10th, and I believe one of the items on that agenda was any special instructions to this committee in considering minor revenues forecast for this fiscal year and the next biennium. Could you update the committee in that regard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record again, Russell Ginden with the Fiscal Analysis Division. Yes, at the Economic Forum met on November 10th, and as normal, they have an agenda item where staff asked them if they have any change in their directions or new directions for the TAC. And at that meeting, the directions were the same as they are for the November 2nd meeting, which is to produce a set of final forecasts of the revenue forecasted or for the revenue sources that you'll be considering this afternoon. And then that forecast that will be approved by this body this afternoon will be taken forward to the Economic Forum for their consideration at their meeting next Thursday, December 3rd. So with that, Madam Chair, I don't know if that's enough information or you wanted additional detail on that issue.
That is enough information for me. Does anybody else have any questions? Not seeing any, so I will ask you to proceed, Mr. Ginden. And it is the intent to go through both items 3 and 4 and then take one motion at the end on both of those items. Mr. Ginden?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Russell Ginden. Maybe before jumping right into agenda item 3, I'll go through the tables and then a little bit of context for all the members. So what you should have available to you electronically were 4 tables. And so one of those is titled Table 3. This is the table that presents the revised forecast if any revisions were made to the revenue sources by each of the different forecasters. That is the agency. An agency would be the executive branch agency responsible for administering and collecting that tax. The fiscal forecast, which is the Fiscal Analysis Division of Legislative Council Bureau, and then the budget forecast, which is the budget office of the Governor's Finance Office. And so what we had as information available is since the last meeting, we were able to get one more month of information. So for some of these revenue sources, that would take us through the end of October. And then even we can go into the controller system and cheat and see what may be posted year to date as of as late as last week, and looking at these revenue sources to see what the year to date actuals were and trying to make sure that the forecasts that were being prepared, especially for some of these smaller revenue sources, that the forecast was at least equal to or greater than what had been collected year to date. And then for many of the other major, what we call the larger major minor revenue sources that this body considers, we would have actual collections through September or October, depending on that monthly revenue source and the timing for the tax or fee to be collected and remitted and then reported by the collecting agency. Possibly what's more important for us as forecasters is we were able to get the first quarter of the actual collections for FY 2021 for those quarterly revenue sources. So in a sense, then we have at least a quarter's worth of information for almost all the revenue sources that the forecasters had to prepare forecasts for and bring forward to this body. And so with that as the context, that's the information for table 3. Then what you have is a table called table 3-difference. That is obviously showing the difference between the forecast that's in table 3 that I just referenced, and it would have been table 3 that was presented to this body at the November 2nd meeting. So that table, wherever you see non-zero numbers, you're seeing the revision by the forecaster for that revenue source. Then you have a table called Technical Advisory Committee - General Fund Revenue Forecast - December 3rd, 2020. This is the revised consensus forecast for this body's consideration this afternoon, coming out of those revised agency fiscal budget forecasts. And then you have the table that's difference, and then everything I just previously stated as the title. And again, that's showing the difference between the November 2nd forecast that was presented to this body and that this body approved and was taken forward to the Economic Forum at their November 10th meeting, compared to the forecast that's in the table that I just referenced. So it's showing that reference between now and the prior forecast. And again, wherever you see non-zero numbers, that would be the difference in the consensus forecast from this time compared to last time. So with that as the introduction for agenda item 3 in terms of the information that's available, I will, per the chair's directions, not go through all the detail, but try and hit the highlights, I think, of the revenue sources and the changes for this body's consideration. And then I can answer any questions that the members may have. I think as I go through this, I realize maybe it's a little harder if you didn't print them out. But principally be driving the presentation off of the difference TAC table, the last table that I referenced, and then the table 3 difference in terms of just sort of commenting on the difference. And I think it's also worth pointing out that this time around, the budget office and the fiscal analysis division don't always ask the executive branch agencies between the late October, early November meeting and then the late November meeting for their revised forecast, just because of the logistics and timing. But staff from the budget office and the fiscal division thought, given the current environment that we're in, it might make sense to ask some of the executive branch agencies or constitutional agencies for any revised forecasts that they may have for some of the larger or major minor revenue sources. And so this would involve, we asked the Department of Taxation, the Treasurer's Office, and the Secretary of State, as well as a few other agencies for if they wanted to revise their forecasts. And if they did, then that information was incorporated into the table 3 under the agency forecast. So with that as the backdrop, what you have when you're looking at the forecast is, I'll start with on the first page, the net proceeds of minerals. And on some of these, if you have a very good memory, then this will be redundant. If you don't, then it'll be new. And so this was one of the revenue sources that was impacted by legislative action from the 31st special session, such that the law was changed to require an additional payment based on the estimated taxes for calendar year 21 to be paid by the mining operators in FY 21, but it is for the state general fund portion only. So thus the legislative action has no impact on the amount of money, the amount of tax to be paid by mining operators that would be distributed to local governments or school districts as their property tax rate that attaches to the net proceeds of minerals. So that's why when you look at this revenue source, you see the big jump up in FY 2021 and then the fallback in FY 22, because this is an action to generate additional revenue for FY 2021 only. And that estimated payment is estimated to be worth approximately $62 million in FY 21 is that the additional payment. So basically that's the effect, is booking two calendar years worth of activity in one fiscal year. There was just a slight upward revision in one of the years by one of the forecasters, this revenue source. Otherwise, it was unchanged compared to the last forecast, as you can see in the table. There are a couple slight tweaks to a couple of the gaming fees that you see listed there under the gaming-state section. But one was to advance license fees. And this was just because the Gaming Control Board staff, Mr. Lott, was able to take account of additional information that he had in terms of what the advanced license fee payments would be. And this is when new properties are opening or there's a change in ownership that requires the advanced license fee to be paid. And then there was a slight revision to the annual fee on games in terms of those Gaming Control Board fees. The next one that's worth mentioning is the Transportation Connection Tax, GL 3073. It's second from the bottom on the table. This one was revised down in the first 2 years and then revised up by approximately $1.5 million in FY 2023. This was principally due to the fiscal division revising its forecast for those 3 years. And the principal reason for the upward revision to FY 23 is probably just the fiscal division getting that additional month and then thinking through what the outlook was for the recovery in 23 was probably not driving that outlook through this revenue source appropriately, which is then the responsible for the upward revision. And then the consensus forecast that you see here for this revenue source is the average of the agency fiscal budget forecast. That's what you see listed in the TAC table. For the cigarette tax here, you have an upward revision in each year. And you can, if looking at the table 3, you can see that's principally because of revisions to the forecast by the agency and budget. And this is, again, we got an additional month's worth of revenue. And it was somewhere, I think, just shy of $16 million, which is a very good month for cigarettes. In fact, 2 of the last 4 months have been in the above 15 million. And so with that information, it necessitated some of the forecasters to bring up their forecast. So that's all I had with regards to the revenue sources on that table. And so I would then move to the third page of the table, because the second page is just the modified business tax. And that's a major revenue source that will be considered by the Economic Forum at their meeting next Thursday. And so then basically the top half of the next page is still the major revenue sources, principally that the Economic Forum handles. So then the one that I think that's worth addressing here is the Governmental Services Tax. This was another revenue source that was affected by a legislative action during the 31st special session, such that this is the revenue source that the revenue comes from a 2009 legislative session action to create a state portion of the Governmental Services Tax when a person pays that registration fee on their vehicle. And so historically, this piece is split between the general fund and the highway fund, or it's all been in the general fund. And so the decision was made by the legislature in the 31st special session and signed by the governor to retain 100% of the GST in the general fund for FY 2021 versus the law prior to that was the retain 25% in this general fund, with the 75% going to the highway fund. And then for FY 2022 and 23, it'll go back down to 25%. Thus, that's why you see the approximately $21.3 million in FY 2020 and then going up to $94 million in FY 21 and then falling back into the around $24 million for each of the next 2 years. So thus that 75% is estimated to be worth approximately about $71 million in FY 21 by having the additional 75% allocated to the general fund. On the business license fee, this revenue source, here the Secretary of State revised their forecast up, and their forecast actually got in the range of where budget and fiscal were, where you see there weren't changes to those forecasts. So the decision was made to, at the prior meeting, we had averaged just fiscal and budget, but here, looking at the agency's forecast and it's being in the range of the other forecasts, it's higher in FY 23 than the other two, but we decided to average all 3 forecasts. thus, the result of that is a slight upward revision in the business license fee in FY22 and FY23. That would be approximately 1.4 million in FY 2022 and 2.7 million in FY23. And then also the liquor tax and other tobacco tax had slight adjustments to them by some of the forecasters. And then since the consensus decision was to go with the average of all three forecasters, that results in a slight revision to the forecast that you see in the tax table. The last revenue source worth addressing on this page is the tax amnesty program that you see just below GL 3068, the branch bank excise tax. And this is again due to a legislative action from the 31st special session, which is the Department of Taxation is required to implement and administer a tax amnesty program not to exceed 90 days, and the program must be concluded on or before June 30th, 2021. And as you may recall, there was questions by this body to Melanie Young, the director of the Department of Taxation. And so there are no changes to the estimate for that program. I just wanted to point out that you can see it is estimated as a one-time revenue source to generate approximately $14 million for across all the different revenue sources that the Department of Taxation administers, that those taxpayers could end up coming in under the amnesty program. And that would be the estimated tax due from that program. So with that, then, that's really the information for that page. So, Madam Chair, moving on to the next page, which the licenses section is the top half of that table. There were just slight revisions to a few of the revenue sources on that table. And again, here, as I stated, we did ask the Secretary of State if they had any desire to revise their forecast, and so they did provide us revisions to, I believe, UCC, notary, and commercial recordings, but they were slight revisions. And then we asked the Athletic Commission, and they provide us a slight adjustment to FY21. Again, principally looking at where we are year to date through about a third of the fiscal year, and being able to take that information into consideration, as well as thinking what may transpire over the remaining of the fiscal year, given the environment that we're in. So under fees and fines, you have slight revisions to a few of those, but I think the one that's the major revision worth talking about is under the short-term car lease. It's GL 3066. And that one, there was an upward revision by the Fiscal Analysis Division, which then the decision was to average the fiscal and budget forecast. And so with that coming in, it drives up the consensus forecast presented in the table. And you can see that the upward revision is fairly substantial by the fiscal division. And the principal reason for this is we really didn't know. We had I think somewhere around $3.8 million collected in the quarter ending FY 2020. And so then the first quarter came in, I think, was it over $9 million? And so we were thinking it would be more in the $5 million range. So because of that miss in terms of underestimating, the fiscal division felt it was prudent to revise the forecast up based on what was going on. And I think perhaps the other forecasters might have been thinking about it more correctly than fiscal, which is for the visitors that are coming that probably don't have their own transportation, they're more likely to maybe use a rental cars than they are Uber or Lyft, because at least you have the ability to have some control over it's your auto, you're the one in the auto, versus Uber and Lyft. You don't know who the driver, and you don't know who's been in the auto. And so we are seeing, if you look at the first quarter of the short-term car rental tax compared to the first quarter of the transportation connection tax, which is where the Uber and Lyft operations are, that the ratio of those has shifted up substantially in the first quarter compared to where you would have seen it pre-pandemic. So that's the information set that fiscal had that felt that we needed to revise our forecast upwards. So then that's the statements that I wanted to make on that page of the table. So then moving to the next page, as I had stated, the treasurer's office did take a look at the treasurer's income under interest income. It's GL 3290 at the top of that use of money and property section of the table. And so it was an upward revision of approximately $1.6 million in FY21, and then around $200,000 in upward revision in FY 2022, and around $350,000 in FY 2023. And this budget and fiscal both concurred in this forecast that the Treasurer's Office provided us, and thus that's the forecast you see reflected in the table is the Treasurer's forecast for interest income. Then going to the other revenue section of the table, there's a slight upward revision to the expired slot machine wagering vouchers by the Gaming Control Board based on year-to-date information. And then I think the other one worth mentioning on this table is the cost recovery plan. This is GL 3276. This is an revenue source that's part of the state budget process. And so if you may recall, the revenues that we had in here for the November 2nd meeting were placeholders. And so waiting for the budget office then to complete their analysis. And so the numbers that you see in here for FY22 and FY23 are the numbers provided to us by the budget office Tuesday morning, is coming out of their work on the governor's executive budget. And so then that concludes the information that I wanted to present with regards to agenda item 3, Madam Chair. So if there are any questions, I can attempt to answer them. And we do have representatives from some of the agencies if they need to jump in and answer questions because of my inability to do so.
Do we have any questions? Ms. Walker?
Yes, thank you. That was excellent, Russell. Thank you so much. You hit pretty much all the questions that I had, except for one. On the general economy, with the news of the vaccine coming quicker than we thought when we met last, has that changed your forecast at all? Are you still thinking in terms of where you were back in when we met on November 2nd?
For the fiscal analysis division, yes, and we can have the other forecasters, but the information about the vaccine is coming relatively soon here. So to try and incorporate some of that, but as a forecaster, that's good news, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
So I think for us is we're still looking at, okay, the vaccine may be a little sooner, but possibly still being sometime in towards the end of the first quarter or second quarter of the next calendar year, thus the end of FY 2021. Because again, it will be great to have a vaccine, but for us as a state that needs visitors, it's that mass vaccination that's possibly more important. So I think from fiscal's perspective, we didn't make any front end changes really to think that, yes, there's some good news on the horizon, but to react too quickly to that.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Madam Chair, if there are no other questions from any of the members.
Mr. Schmidt has a question.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you. Just a quick question. You explained the short-term car lease. I thought it made a lot of sense. But when I look at the transportation excise tax revenue source, we're not like the decrease there is a lot smaller than the increase that we're seeing on the short-term car lease side. Should there be any reason to maybe reduce that at all, given the potential shift, or do you think that this incorporates that sort of comparison?
Again, I can speak from the fiscal analysis division point of view, Mr. Schmidt, and again, you can see we're the one as the forecaster that's driving the revision in the forecast. And again, part of it for the short-term car rental, I've answered that. But then on the T&C, the Transportation Connection Tax, excuse me, and looking at that one, It was more for the fiscal division, a back end FY23 forecast issue than I really think a front end, because we had a couple months of the actual T&C tax to look at. We just didn't have anything on the short-term car rental. And so when we got the additional month of T&C, it's averaging around $1 million a month, the first 3 months of FY 2021, where it would normally be, I believe, going from memory, somewhere around $2.6 to $3 million a month. Versus the T&C, right, or the short-term car rental, when it came in stronger, we saw the ratio of those two taxes shift, and then we realized, oh, that makes sense for the reason that I explained. So, but then why fiscal is revising it up so much in FY23 is I just think I was too low. I'll be honest that given what we thought is the recovery scenario that fiscal has for FY23 that we're trying to drive through all of our revenue sources, I just missed translating that view of the world through the T&C correctly. And it helped getting the first quarter and then looking at that. I believe fiscal has the ratio between the short-term car rental to the T&C staying higher through the rest of FY21, and then as things start to recover, then the ratio between the short-term car rental and the T&C then starts to get closer to back to where we have historically seen it by FY 2023. So I don't know if that sufficiently addresses your question or not with regards to asking, should we be adjusting perhaps the T&C? If you're asking fiscal, no, we think we made the adjustment that we felt we needed to be because of the story that we had in our heads for November 2nd, and then realizing the first quarter told us we needed to change that story for a short-term car rental, but not change it for the front end of the T&C, but change it on the back end for FY23.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional questions? I am not seeing any. Go ahead, Mr. Gendon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I will proceed with agenda item 4, which is the review and approval of forecasts for the various tax credit programs. And so this one's easy. We did not make any adjustments to the tax credit programs. We did review them again, and we just don't have any additional information available within the latest month that would necessitate us changing our estimates for the tax credits that will be taken for the various programs that you see here. So with that, I can answer any questions that the members may have about the tax credit programs or the forecasts that are in here, but there were no changes.
Are there any questions on the tax credit items? Not seeing any. So with that, the committee has been presented both the final revenue forecasts for the selected general fund revenues, presentation at the Economic Forum's meeting on December 3rd, and also reviewed the final forecast for the various tax credit programs. I would remind the committee that the action taken by this committee today is a recommendation to the Economic Forum, and they have the ability to change these. Prior to taking action, Mr. Gendon, could you summarize the bottom line for the committee of the forecast changes?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Looking at this, and I'll look at the TAC forecast and the bottom line here to give you some metrics as it compares the November 25th forecast here to the November 2nd. So for FY 2021, the total general fund revenue after tax credits forecast of the $820.97 million is approximately $13.2 million over the November 2nd forecast for this fiscal year. The forecast that you see there on the table of 665.545, so $665.5 million for FY 2022 is approximately $8.6 million higher than the forecast that was approved by this body November 2nd. And then for FY23, the forecast of $676.4 million approximately is $11 million greater than the forecast that was considered and approved by this body at the November 2nd meeting. So for those 3 years, that's approximately $32.8 million more for all 3 fiscal years compared to the forecast that was presented to this body on November 2nd. And so then looking at it on a biennial basis, if you add up for the current biennium, which is the actual for FY 2020, and the forecast that you see here for FY 2021, and again, I'm going to stay at the bottom line, total general fund after tax credits, that's a total of about $1.5 billion compared to, for the current biennium, compared to approximately $1.34 billion for the next biennium, that is the 21-23 biennium. So that's about $164.1 million less for the next biennium than the current biennium. But I think it's worth stopping to point out again that what's driving that difference. And so it's worth then saying that, remember, I noted the 3 revenue sources that came out of special actions, actions during the special session. The net proceeds of minerals additional payment of approximately $62.4 million. The GST, which is approximately $70.7 million, and then the Amnesty Program of $14 million. So that's approximately $147 million. That's in FY21 due to the revenue actions in the current biennium that is not in the next biennium because they were one-time revenue enhancements for FY21. So, so if you would then go look at that $164 million that I said that the next biennium is below the estimate for the current biennium, right? That drops to about $17 million, right? Once you take account of the one-time stuff and try and get a little bit more apples to apples comparison. Then I think it's also worth noting, and I probably should have said this under agenda item 4, there were no changes to the tax credits, but what was noted when we had the meeting on November 2nd, that there are additional tax credits estimated for the next biennium compared to this biennium due to the Nevada New Markets Tax Credit Program being re-upped for another cycle. And then as well as estimates for some of the other tax credit programs. So the actual tax credits are estimated to be about $19 million higher in the 21-23 biennium compared to the current 19-21 biennium. So then if you take account of that, remember I said it's about $17 million when you try and get apples to apples for the one time. Well, then if you pull out the tax credits and just try and go revenue to revenue, apples to apples, then the next biennium's forecast is really about $2 million higher than the current biennium when you start to try and get as close as you can to apples. And so, Madam Chair, that was, I think, the information that was worth providing the body to just try and give some context. Because when you look at this and you're just going to go, oh, well, yes, clearly statistically, there's less money being estimated for these revenue sources and the tax credits. But when you try and take account of what was tax credits and what was one-time stuff from 2021, I think then you can see it's actually almost a flat forecast, $2 million up, right? For the revenue sources, that is. And with that, I can answer any questions that the members may have based on that information or comments made by me.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from the committee members? I am not seeing any, so I would take a motion on both the revenue forecast and the review and approval of the various tax credit programs. The motion would be to approve what was presented to the committee with the changes.
Excuse me, Ms. Brown.
Mm-hmm.
This is Joey Albany with Broadcast Production Services. I'm sorry, the audio was cut out. Do you mind sitting a little bit closer to the microphone and speaking closer into it, please?
Okay. Can you hear me? Is this better?
That is much better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I will repeat that. So I intend to take a motion on both the revenue forecast and the review and approval of the various tax credit programs. The motion would be to approve what was presented to the committee with the changes that Mr. Ginden discussed, along with what was changed on the bottom line from the November 3rd meeting. At this time, I would accept a motion.
I'd make that motion.
Second, Madam Chair.
Second by Mary Walker. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Madam Chair, if it's okay, I'll call the roll for a roll call vote, just so we can get it on the record.
Sure.
And I think, yes, and your mic was tending to cut out a little. I'll just, as your staff, to make sure we get this clearly on the record for the body, and then also for the secretary to be able to do the minutes, that what we have is a motion that was requested by the chair to approve the forecasts that were presented under agenda item 3 and the forecast for the tax credits under agenda item 4 that are reflected in the TAC forecast table that was presented to this body. That request for a motion was made by David, first by David Schmidt, a second by Mary Walker. And so then with that, Madam Chair, I will call the roll. Mr. Klinger?
Yes.
I'm just going to call Mr. Hardcastle. You haven't joined us?
Yes.
Nope, don't see him. Okay. Mr. Schmidt?
Yes, also.
Well, we do have Mr. Hardcastle. I apologize, Mr. Hardcastle.
No problem. Just had problems unmuting.
Nope, that's good.
So,
So,
yes.
and so, also let the record show that Mr. Hardcastle was in attendance for the meeting. And so with that, then Mr. Schmidt,
Yes.
Mr. Thorley,
Yes.
Ms. Walker,
Yes.
Vice Chair Kaufman,
Yes.
Chair Brown.
Yes.
Madam Chair, let it show, the record show that the motion to approve the forecast was approved unanimously by the members of the TAC.
And moving on, this is the second opportunity for a public comment, and I would hand it off to EPS staff to determine.
Oh, Madam Chair, this is broadcast. We usually take a 2-minute break to allow participants time to call in for the second chat, the second public comment.
Okay. 2 minutes.
Hello, Madam Chair. This is broadcast again. The public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Thank you. Seeing no public comment, this meeting is adjourned. I'd like to thank you all very much, and I'd also like to thank staff for all their hard work and everything that they did to put into updating these forecasts for us today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Everybody have a good holiday.
Thanks, you too.